You know the saying, you can't win your fantasy football draft in the first couple of rounds, but you could lose it. Well, here's some players that if you draft, you might as well just throw away your entry fee money. Remember last year when JT at the 1.1 was money in the bank? Najee Harris and Dalvin Cook were early first round picks because they were safe. Okay, well, that's not going to happen this year. We're not going to make those mistakes and pick those players who are going to burn us in the early rounds. So, Chris, let's start off with a player that you think is going to really hurt you if you pick him early.
And I really think Devonte Adams is going to hurt you if you pick him early. He's still going as a borderline first rounder, and I don't get it. I mean, on the one hand, yes, he's been an elite real life and fantasy wide receiver for years, but nothing lasts forever. And I feel like the days of Devonte Adams being a truly elite fantasy wide receiver are over, but people are still drafting him that way. And when you look at last year, there were signs. I mean, his catch rate was barely over 55%. His yards per target was way down. But the thing that really propelled him last year was, number one, 180 targets. That's an incredible number. But also, he led the entire NFL in air yards last year. Why? Because he had Derek Carr. When you look at Derek Carr last year, he was fifth among all quarterbacks in total air yards, and he also ranked second in air yards per attempt. So he was out there chucking the ball down the field to Devonte Adams. Who is Adams' quarterback now in 2023? Maybe Jimmy Garoppolo, who's kind of like the anti-Derek Carr. Jimmy G ranked 30th in air yards per attempt last year at 6.9 yards per attempt. That is just abysmal, and that's going to kill a lot of Devonte Adams' value because he's not going to get those deep down the field targets anymore, and it's hard to see him just getting force-fed 180 targets again. So I still think Devonte Adams will be good in fantasy. I would happily take him maybe late in the second round, early third round. But to me, as right around that 1-2 turn just seems way too crazy high. I just think the days of those massive ceiling weeks, those massive ceiling games are behind him now that he's got Jimmy G. And look, it might not even be Jimmy G. What if it's Aiden O'Connell or something? So to me, just way too much risk for Devonte Adams at this point. There are wide receivers behind him that have plenty of upside without the risk. Don't take Devonte Adams this early.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have no idea, honestly, if Jimmy G is even going to be the option there, if he's going to even make it to week one, if he doesn't get cleared physically. And then it's too late, right? They don't have a fallback option. They can't draft a guy early. The free agent market is dried up. You've got to be super worried. And passing on a guy with so much upside like a Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave to get someone who has been a top wide receiver in fantasy like Devonte Adams could wind up biting you. For a lot of those same reasons, I'm actually going to stick with that same team in the Raiders. And look, maybe this would be a mistake doing it 2 years in a row and doubting Josh Jacobs, but I'm going to do it again because you know what? Yeah, we all, and I mean all of us in the fantasy community, we whiffed hard on Jacobs having a monster season because it looked like maybe the writing was on the wall for him to kind of give way to a younger running back like a Zamir White or somebody else. And instead, he made us look like fools and had one of the best seasons for a running back. But that was last year. So there are a lot of reasons to be nervous about him again this year, probably more so than we did last year. So first of all, let's talk about that monster season. Yeah, all credit to him. He played his heart out and he had a great year. But now he's coming off a season where he touched the ball 393 times. And so that's always a red flag for a running back when you get so many touches. So he's not quite at kind of that magical 1,200 touch mark that you talk about all the time, Chris. That's really a warning sign for running backs where they start to taper off because of that wear and tear in their body. But we know historically when running backs come off a season where they've touched the ball 350 times or more, we see a big drop in efficiency the next year. Okay, so look for that, number one. Maybe he just doesn't have the same level of season as he did last year. But also, here's the thing. Last year, he was playing for the money. He wanted that big contract. Well, guess what? He didn't get it, right? He's a running back, and running backs just don't get paid anymore in the NFL like they used to. And so he's getting tagged. He didn't like it. And now there is a serious and legit threat that he's going to hold out. All right, and now we've been worried about all these guys who might not play under the tag. There's other guys like Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley. That's the guy you're really worried about, right? Barkley, the bigger name. But Jacobs looks like he's a little bit more of a serious threat to actually carry through this. He's made some kind of veiled threats about, taking a stand and doing this to set a precedent for future running backs. Whatever it is, good for him. It's probably not going to turn out good. You remember Le'Veon Bell a few years ago? Yeah, it didn't turn out too great for anybody who drafted him and basically wasted a season taking him early. So here's the thing. Second round ADP, borderline, late second, early third round pick. You might be taking him as your RB1 for where he's being drafted. And that basically would be a wasted pick if he misses time, because even if he only misses a couple of games, a few games, he's going to have to get into game shape. The injury risk just increases. There's so many red flags here. And then there's also the fact that he just might not do what he did last year because nobody thought he would do as well as he did. So, man, I just can't take on that risk so early with a running back. Running back is so risky as a position anyways. Give me a guy who at least I know will see the field and has that floor. All right, who else might wind up burning fantasy owners this year?
Yeah, I talked about this guy very early in the offseason, but I feel like I need to talk about him again, and that is Deebo Samuel. I really think people still are chasing that 2021 version of Deebo Samuel, and we're not going to see that guy again. And he's still going as a third-round draft pick this year, and I think he's just going to burn everybody who takes him in that range. Look at the difference between Deebo Samuel 2021 and Deebo Samuel last year. 2021, 120 targets last year, 95. He ranked number 6th in team target share in 2021, only 19th last year. Also, 36th in air yards in 2021. 95th in air yards last year, almost outside the top 100. Also, his average target distance, 8.1 in 2021, 4.2 last year. That means he's only getting thrown passes 4 yards past the line of scrimmage. His role completely has changed from 2021 to 2022 because in 2021, Brandon Ayuk was in the doghouse. He wasn't on the field. Kyle Shanahan didn't like him. Deebo was the only guy they really had to rely on. Now they have Brandon Ayuk. They have a downfield wide receiver who's very good, who broke out last year. Deebo's role changed to more of this kind of screen guy, quick slant type of guy, and that's a very hard way to make a living as a fantasy wide receiver, especially your third round pick. You are going to need a massive yards after catch season or a massive touchdown season. Do you really want to gamble on either of those with your third round pick in an offense that's loaded with playmakers? I already talked about Brandon Ayuk. They got George Kittle. They've got CMC. There's so much talent around Deebo now. He is no longer the focal point of this offense like he was in 2021. And sure, he's not being drafted as high as he was last year this time. But he's still being drafted way too high considering how his situation has changed. So Deebo, just one of those guys I'm just going to be avoiding this year. I feel like he's a trap pick in the early rounds, and people are going to regret it.
And just like the last player you talked about, yeah. Oh, yeah, by the way, who's the quarterback for the Niners this year? I know this one hurts a little bit, but it's just business, not personal. When DK Metcalf was first drafted, I immediately put him as my number one dynasty receiver. I said, this guy's going to dominate in the league for years. There's a question about his route running, his ability to stay healthy, and he's already answered all these questions, but he hasn't been the number one or even close to the number one receiver in fantasy because he just hasn't been used enough. And you know what? The usage, even though it was pretty good last year, is going to go down. So first, let me start with the fact that as much as he is physically talented, he's a unique kind of receiver with his build. Nobody will outmuscle DK Metcalf on a jump ball. So last year, he got 1,000 yards receiving, but barely. The year before that, not even 1,000. His second season where it looked like he was going to break out and become one of the top receivers in the game, we just haven't seen him get back to that. And you know what? It's weird because it's not really even target share, which is one of the number one indicators for a receiver. Last year, he was tied for 14th among receivers with 8.6 targets per game. But what did that translate to? In PPR leagues for fantasy, he was only 26th, the wide receiver 26th in fantasy points per game. So if you think about that, there's a little discrepancy there. And now that targets per game, it's guaranteed to go down. Not only did the Seahawks draft a receiver, they were the first team to draft a receiver, and they drafted arguably the best rookie here with Jackson Smith and Jigba. Okay, so that's obviously going to eat into some target share, but a lot of people don't even realize you should be also worried about the running back they took, which is Zach Charbonnet. This is a team that already likes to run the ball and have that identity, but Charbonnet, the reason they drafted him, and I keep saying this, it's not so much because they want to replace Kenneth Walker, it's because they want a pass-catching threat at running back. And Pete Carroll has basically said as much as what I've been saying. He said about Charbonnet, he'll be a great fit and a great addition. Really, we're going to find out how far he can take it in terms of the receiving part of it. He's spelling it out for us. You're going to see a lot of receptions from this running back and the rookie receiver that we just drafted. This team is going to spread the ball out. It's going to make for a much better offense, but it's going to make DK Metcalf just a little bit less important in terms of his role as the number one receiver. And Tyler Lockett is still there. Yeah, sure, he's older. He's 30 now. It doesn't seem to matter. He's still effective. So Metcalf, as great as he is, he's just not going to be a focal point here in this passing game. And he's gone way too early. I don't honestly understand how he's still going within the top 3 rounds of fantasy leagues. There's no way he can be a fantasy wide receiver 1 for your team. Maybe not even a wide receiver 2, to be honest. He wasn't last year, and now we're going to see his target share go down. I mean, this basically is a reach for you, a massive reach. I don't think it's worth doing. Those picks might wind up to haunt you in fantasy drafts this year, but these picks might wind up saving your team.